And good evening. Tonight, a 70-year-old gunman is in police custody, charged with capital murder after opening fire inside of a church. Gunshots ringing out at a potluck dinner at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church just outside of Birmingham, Alabama last night. 3 people shot and killed, all of them 75 and older. The shooter, now identified as Robert Finlay, you see him right there, Robert Finlay Smith, I should say. Police revealing he would occasionally attend services at that very church. Members of the congregation consoling one another in the parking lot immediately after the shooting. And tonight, a growing memorial out front, flowers and handwritten signs honoring the lives lost. Police revealing tonight the tragic situation could have been even worse if not for the brave actions of a single churchgoer inside that room. NBC's Sam Brock is in Vestivia Hills in central Alabama. He leads us off tonight.
America's latest jarring example of gun violence.
They were having dinner and they were having fun, and then the next minute they weren't.
Happened at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in a picturesque suburb of Birmingham. Authorities releasing a mugshot of the alleged gunman, 70-year-old Robert Finlay Smith, an occasional church attendee who opened fire at a potluck dinner.
At some point, he produced a handgun and began shooting, striking 3 victims.
All 3 were killed, ranging in age from 75 to 84 years old.
I think you described a situation in which a fellow parishioner subdued the shooter. How critical was that in saving lives?
It was extremely critical in saving lives. The person that subdued the suspect, in my opinion, is a hero.
Police did not reveal a motive, and the county sheriff's office says the shooter has no booking history there. Hundreds came out for a church service this morning, sad and shaken.
Especially with a church environment, I think a place you consider to be really safe and a place of refuge is now kind of violated in a way.
A minister here now has direct ties to 2 church shootings. He tells me he went to Seminole School with 2 people murdered at the horrific church massacre at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, which happened exactly 7 years ago today. A country in crisis.
I was just really sad. I think it's sad to see something like that happen where you live.
Confounded again by gun violence and split about what to do about it.
All right, Sam Brock joins us now live. Sam, I also know you have some breaking updates on the investigation, including information about the gunman.
Tom, that's right. We learned several hours ago that Vestavia Hills police had shut down a local road and had executed a search warrant connected to this church shooting behind me. Turns out, of course, that hours after that, the DA provided word they were bringing capital murder charges of 2 or more victims against Finlay Smith. Now, he doesn't have a booking history in Jefferson County, where I am. We also learned he is 6'4", 250 pounds, and yet a parishioner, according to police, was able to subdue him in the middle of that, potentially saving lives.
Back here at home, former President Trump lashing out at the committee investigating the January 6 riots and his former Vice President Mike Pence. Trump, speaking at a Faith and Freedom Coalition conference in Nashville, denied reports that he called Pence a wimp and slammed Pence for lacking the courage to overturn the 2020 election, calling him a, quote, human conveyor belt.
I never called Mike Pence a wimp. I never called him a wimp. Mike Pence had a chance to be great. He had a chance to be, frankly, historic. But just like Bill Barr and the rest of these weak people, Mike, and I say it sadly because I like him, but Mike did not have the courage to act.
All right, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa joins us now. Ali, it felt like this was the president's opportunity to settle scores, especially against his former vice president.
Well, worth mentioning at the top here, Tom, is that this is the same event that former VP Mike Pence was booed and called a traitor at last year after refusing to overturn the results of the 2020 election on January 6th. And the theme of Trump's speech today in Nashville is really the theme that the January 6th committee wrapped yesterday's hearing on. Really this theme of how Trump's continued rhetoric is continuing to affect the state of our democracy today. And of course, this is coming as rumors swirl over whether Pence and or Trump could possibly announce a 2024 presidential bid soon. I think it's particularly notable that Pence was not at this event at all, this event that's largely seen as a GOP springboard for presidential hopefuls. Meanwhile, you have Trump headlining the event altogether, Tom.
And Ali, you know, the speech it's over an hour long, over and a half hour long, and it went into some of the president's big talking points for his possible 2024 run. When he did mention that, the crowd erupted in cheers. He even mentioned, if he became president again, the Capitol rioters and possible pardons.
That was one comment that really stuck out to me watching it personally, because after what we learned in yesterday's January 6th committee hearing, that several members of Trump's inner circle actually asked for presidential pardons for their participation and involvement in events on January 6th. Take a listen to part of Trump's speech where he mentioned this.
Yet even after the shocking attempt on Justice Kavanaugh's life, the Biden administration is continuing to allow leftist mobs to freely form in front of the justice's home and the homes of others. Even while January 6th defendants are having their lives totally destroyed and being treated worse than terrorists and murderers, despite most being charged with parading through the Capitol, most people should not be treated the way they're being treated. And if I become president someday, if I decide to do it, I will be looking at them very, very seriously for pardons.
So really shocking to hear Trump proposing using presidential pardoning power for events on a day the committee says he is directly responsible for, Tom.
All right, Ali Rafa from Capitol Hill for us. Ali, thank you. We turn now to the weather. All week we've been telling you about those extreme conditions, and there's no letting up. Overnight flash flooding in Columbia, South Carolina left cars submerged in high water. You see them there. Some drivers even had to be rescued from their vehicles, with another round of storms impacting the mid-Atlantic. I want to get right to meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, walk us through what's going to happen over the next couple days.
We're in this stuck weather pattern where we have this extreme heat, and then late in the afternoon with all the heat and humidity, we're just getting explosive thunderstorms, and we're getting these flash flood events and a lot of lightning problems too. Notice we haven't had a lot of tornadoes. That's typically when we get in earlier in the spring. So let me show you the radar, what we're dealing with now. These line of storms have been rolling through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Lots of lightning, some hail with these storms and damaging winds. That's the biggest concern. So a lot of people still going to have to deal with thunderstorms through this evening. About 29 million people at risk. The strongest of those storms will be rolling through southern Virginia, just north of Raleigh and near Norfolk and Virginia Beach as we go throughout the night. Now let's talk about the heat. Even at this hour, it is still brutally hot. I mean, Montgomery and Memphis, you're in a battle. You're both at 108 for how it feels outside. It's just, you know, you're in the oven when it's that hot. And tomorrow and right into the weekend, it's not really going to be any better. We still have millions of people under heated alerts or watches, and this will expand as we head throughout the upcoming weekend. We have another heat wave that is building in the middle of the country. So it's just kind of shifting. It was in the middle of the country. It went to the Ohio Valley, to the southeast, and now it's going back into areas from the Dakotas all the way down through Texas. Everyone will feel 100 plus. And look at how hot it's going to get on Sunday. Fargo, 101. And let's contrast that with Caribou, Maine, who's going to be 53 on Sunday for Father's Day. So, Tom, it's a wild weather pattern as we're going here towards the end of June.
Those temperatures are all over the place. All right, Bill, we thank you for that. We want to head to Wall Street now in the economy, capping off a rocky week with a slight rally. The S&P and NASDAQ closing higher, with the Dow ending the week in the red and below 30,000. It's been a crazy week, a confusing week. So to help investors understand this rough week on the street, Kristen O'Keefe-Merrick joins Top Story for the first time. She's a money expert with O'Keefe Financial Partners. Kristen, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Tom. Thanks for having me.
All right, so a lot of people, Americans all across the country that have 401ks, have been looking at their 401ks this week, and it's been a bloodbath. What advice do you have for them?
My advice is to stay the course here. This is not the time to be making wild, crazy choices like selling. There's a lot of fear at the moment, and we have to kind of take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We know that this is cyclical. We know that these markets are cyclical, and if you go back and look at stocks over time, they will rally, but don't allow fear to dictate your portfolio.
Let's give some real advice. If someone's watching CNBC and the market's tanking and they're freaking out, what's their first move? Do they call Fidelity? Do they call their financial planner? What should they do?
Call your financial planner. If you have one, call them because they will give this advice to you. No one wants you to be selling at the lows, right? No one wants you to be capitulating here. There's other ways. If you don't have an advisor, then you can think about ways of trying to hedge your portfolios. Maybe think about things that would materially rise in inflationary environments, like commodities, maybe owning energy, maybe owning agriculture, things like that. Even short-term bonds right now, you can still make a little bit of yield.
Energy, fertilizer stocks doing very well. They have been doing well since what's happened in Ukraine, unfortunately. I do want to ask you, though, people are throwing around the word recession. We covered a lot here on Top Story. A lot of very smart economists think there's the risk for a recession, a hurricane. That's what Jamie Dimon called it. Lawrence Summers says most likely we will see a recession in 2 years. But you don't think we're that far yet. Why?
I don't. I think if you look at, first of all, recession is a retraction in growth, and we are not there yet. And if you look at the other factors that we like to look at, the labor market, it's a very tight labor market. Unemployment is at historical lows. You have something called PCE, which is consumption spending, which has not dipped. You have still a white-hot market in real estate. There are a lot of factors right now that are still pointing towards positive growth, but inflation is getting in our way, and we need to be able to figure out a way to combat this inflation before it does take us to the recession.
What are some real things people can do if a recession does hit, just to prepare themselves right now? We were talking before the show started, and you said it's a good time to look at all your finances, your house, your job. How's everything going with your kids' savings, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I always like to talk about my personal audit, looking at your whole picture, right? How much debt do you have? Do you have debt? Is it good debt, bad debt? How much are you spending? This is a really crazy time in terms of how we're spending money on things like gas and food. Are there things that you can do now to protect yourself in the future for further rising costs, which unfortunately I think we're going to have to deal with this summer
and live with? Just kind of be very careful, be very conservative in your choices.
Yeah, being conservative, being thoughtful, but please don't mess with this portfolio at this point without some professional advice.
Right. Kristen O'Keefe-Merrick, we thank you so much for joining Top Story. I'm sure we're going to see you again. All right, now to a major update in the saga of Julian Assange, the founder of the controversial organization WikiLeaks. The UK approving his extradition to the U.S., where he faces espionage charges for publishing classified documents. Matt Bradley has more from London tonight.
Tonight, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been approved for extradition to the United States to face espionage charges. UK officials saying in a statement, in this case, the UK courts have not found that it would be oppressive, unjust, or an abusive process to extradite Mr. Assange. Assange's wife speaking out from London.
I'm going to spend every waking hour fighting for Julian until he's free.
His brother and father speaking out in New York.
Today is a dark day for democracy.
Assange is wanted in the U.S. for 18 charges, including breaking espionage laws over WikiLeaks' release of hundreds of thousands of confidential diplomatic cables in 2010 and 2011. Lawyers and supporters arguing he was acting as a journalist.
You know, there have been a number of cases since 9/11 in which the government has used the Espionage Act against leakers, against people, government insiders who share information with the press. But it has never before used the Espionage Act against a publisher.
Some experts say the 2010 leaks were one of the contributing factors to the revolution in Tunisia, which sparked the broader Arab Spring, something Assange addressed himself back in 2011.
That everyone could see, and no one could deny, that the Ben Ali regime was fundamentally corrupt.
In 2012, he moved into the Ecuadorian embassy in London as asylum to avoid extradition to Sweden over rape and sexual assault charges he has denied.
Europe is meant to be a place where the rule of law is respected.
Sweden dropped those charges in 2019, but Assange wasn't in the clear. That same year, Assange was dragged out of the embassy, the Trump administration soon after charging him with espionage. That, even though it was WikiLeaks that released thousands of Hillary Clinton's emails late in the 2016 presidential campaign, that release not related to these charges. Now, the WikiLeaks founder has spent 3 years in London's Belmarsh prison awaiting the news he got today, the UK giving the green light for his extradition to the US. But the court and government's decisions had almost nothing to do with his actions or free speech. Instead, they were mostly focused on whether the U.S. would respect Assange's human rights. He faces up to 175 years in prison. He's denied any wrongdoing.
Yeah, Tom, well, Julian Assange has 2 weeks in order to appeal this decision from the Home Secretary, and you can bet he will. We've already heard from his wife, his father, his brother from WikiLeaks organization themselves saying that they all intend to fight this decision. Tom?
Texas, where a pilot is remarkably alive after his plane, get this, crashed into a lake in Austin. The terrifying moments captured on camera. Jesse Kirch has the amazing rescue.
One moment, this small airplane was gliding over Austin's Lady Bird Lake. The next, splashing down. One witness snapping pictures of Thursday's harrowing crash.
Wait a minute, that plane's really, really low, and it's about to hit the bridge. And then it went up and barely went over the bridge, and then right on the other side of the bridge, boom, plummeted in the water.
Tonight, officials say the pilot is remarkably alive, adding he made it out of the plane himself before a paddleboarder moved in.
I put on a life jacket for him, and then we both together paddled our way over and then took him to the shore to get to medical services.
EMS 3, be advised, we're getting word with one patient in the aircraft.
Officials say EMS took the pilot to a local hospital with what authorities are calling, quote, potentially serious injuries. Thankfully, they say no one else was hurt.
I was expecting to see something much worse than a man still alive floating. So I was very relieved to see that he was still conscious and everything.
Here's an idea of how much worse it could have been.
They literally missed the bridge by not that much, so that could have been like way worse. They could have hit that building or our building or whatever.
The plane itself set mostly underwater before it was finally fished out. Officials say a state game warden was flying the 2009 Cessna when it went down during a test flight following routine maintenance. According to authorities, the pilot reported mechanical issues and then, quote, landed the plane. Tonight, NTSB is investigating what caused the crash with answers up in the air. Jesse Kirch, NBC News.
All right, Jesse, we thank him for that. When we come back, the major COVID headline parents are going to want to hear. The FDA authorizing 2 shots for kids as young as 6 months old, how soon first doses could start going into arms, and the thief going up in flames. The suspect caught on camera trying to steal gas. You see him there. Stop, dropping, and rolling because he's on fire. How this all happened. Stay with us. All right, we are back now with the news feed, and we begin with the major step forward for the country's youngest unvaccinated group, the FDA authorizing the Pfizer vaccine for children ages 6 months to 4 years, and the Moderna vaccine for kids ages 6 months to 5 years. A CDC advisory committee is set to hold a vote tomorrow. If the agency's director signs off, shots could go into arms as early as next week. Now to one gas thief in Salt Lake City getting a little more than he bargained for. Take a look at the surveillance video. It shows the man trying to steal gas from a truck when he accidentally set himself on fire. He was having trouble siphoning gas from the tank when he decided to drill a hole in it. The thief stopped, dropped, and rolled when he was on fire, essentially, and he was able actually to get away before he was picked up. An investigation in Massachusetts tonight after a car crashed through a store supporting former President Trump. Surveillance video captured the moment the vehicle plowed, look at that, plowed through a front window of the New England for Trump store in Easton. Racks of clothes and hats sent flying. Only one employee was inside the store at the time and was not injured. Police are now looking into reports the crash was intentional. And finally, an internal letter at SpaceX has put several employees out of a job. At least 5 workers there fired after a letter critical of CEO Elon Musk was circulated through the company. According to 2 people familiar with that company, the letter described Musk's public behavior as a, quote, frequent source of distraction and embarrassment for SpaceX employees. All right, LinkedIn has some 830 million members, and among them, authorities say, are sophisticated criminals who make fake profiles targeting victims with investment schemes. Many of those schemes involving cryptocurrency. In a CNBC exclusive, Yasmin Khorram investigated the link to fraud.
How big of a threat is this on LinkedIn?
It's a significant threat.
Sean Reagan, special agent in charge of the FBI San Francisco and Sacramento field offices, says criminal rings are exploiting LinkedIn to lure users into crypto investment schemes by people offering financial advice, but who end up stealing the victim's savings. Reagan says the FBI is working closely with LinkedIn to combat the fraud. The FBI has opened investigations, but would not disclose specifics about pending cases.
Unfortunately, just like any other good thing, there are unscrupulous people organizations, entities out there that want to take advantage of that platform as an opportunity to commit fraud and other criminal activities.
Are the criminals simply banking on the fact that they know there's someone out there who will take the bait?
They usually don't necessarily care who particularly the individual is. They're going to cast a wide net and see who falls into that net.
Like May So, a Florida benefits manager, she says she lost $288,000 to a fraudster on LinkedIn in just a few months. It all started with a routine request to connect with another LinkedIn professional.
I never think that would happen on LinkedIn at all.
Until she says that connection, which she believed to be a friend offering solid financial advice, convinced her to buy Bitcoin, using first a real investment platform and then eventually moving all her funds to a site controlled by the fraudster.
I'm sorry. Because the money that I save, every single dollar, I earned that with my own pain and hard working. It hurts.
The company acknowledges there's been a recent increase in fraud, saying we enforce our policies, which are very clear. Fraudulent activity, including financial scams, are not allowed on LinkedIn. We work every day to keep our members safe against fake accounts, false information, and suspected fraud. That's small comfort to other victims.
I lost $700K.
I lost 1.6 million.
I lost 1.3 million.
Mine was 189,000.
Mine is 300,000.
We were allowed to join this group of victims defrauded on LinkedIn that meets regularly over Zoom for emotional support.
Why do you all want to remain anonymous?
The business image I have in the community, and I just don't want this shared.
People kind of judge you, right? Like, oh, how come you're so stupid?
What's your message to these victims?
I would say to the victims that it's not their fault that they were victimized. It's the perpetrator's fault. It's the criminal's fault. And they spend their nights and days thinking about ways to victimize and defraud people.
And with that, Yasmin Khorram joins us now. Yasmin, you know, hearing from those support groups, you can tell how painful this is for the victims. And I think what was most fascinating about your story is that this scam happened on LinkedIn, which you would think of a place where people only do business and go to kind of meet other colleagues, but clearly there's scammers out there.
There clearly are, and LinkedIn's top privacy and security executive says the company took down around 32 million fake accounts in 2021 alone, and its automated systems usually catch around 99% of scams and spam. As for May Sol, a happy development I have to share with you guys. Just this week, she landed her dream job, Tom, and she found it on LinkedIn.
Glad she's slowly getting back on her feet there. Yasmin Khorram for us from CNBC Tonight. Yasmin, we thank you for that story. Now to another crime, but one that changed the course of history. Watergate at 50. The political scandal that brought down the President of the United States began to unfold 50 years ago today. But when 5 men were arrested for breaking into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in Washington, no one had any idea it would become one of the defining events of the 20th century. Pete Williams has this look back with the police officers who were there.
Early in the morning, 50 years ago, these 2 men were Washington, D.C. police officers responding to a report of a break-in at the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. Walking through these very same halls, they didn't know what to expect.
Do I think we're onto something? Yes, but I have no idea how big it's going to be.
No idea that the arrest they made that night would lead to the discovery of a political scandal that ended with Richard Nixon becoming the only American president ever to leave office in the middle of his term.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Watergate changed the American political system and the very language of scandal. At first, it looked like a petty crime. 5 men arrested June 17, 1972, after breaking into the National Democratic Party headquarters. Paul Leeper and John Barrett responded to the police radio call while they were on regular duty as part of a plainclothes detail. A security guard at the Watergate office building called police after noticing that someone had used tape to prevent the stairwell doors from locking. With guns drawn, they searched room by room in the suite of Democratic offices now occupied by a publishing company until they came to a room of cubicles. Officer John Barrett suddenly saw an arm.
I yelled something to the effect, get your hands up, et cetera, expletive deleted, I'm sure. And Paul came in, jumped up on a desk, pointed his gun down. The 5 hands go up here.
This photo shows the actual desk the Watergate burglars hid behind. One of them was holding a raincoat and wouldn't drop it. Barrett feared it was hiding a gun.
He dropped the coat. He didn't have a gun in his hand, but it was precarious at that point. It was like really bad. I was almost getting ready to let a round go.
You're thinking this might be a burglary. So what do you think when you see 5 guys stand up in suits?
These guys all look like business people, you know, so I'm thinking, is this some kind of international thing that I
mean like spies?
Yeah, well, I don't know really what I'm into. I know I'm in something big.
The White House at first called it a third-rate burglary. It soon became clear that something much bigger was involved, even though all these years later, it's never been firmly established who ordered the break-in or what the purpose was. But from the beginning, a big question was how high up did it go? As the scandal spread to Nixon's aides, he claimed he knew nothing. That defense soon began to unravel, in part based on facts uncovered by Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. A year later, the Senate opened its marathon Watergate hearings. A key witness, John Dean, the White House counsel, said Nixon knew about efforts to cover up the break-in.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
Then a spectacular discovery. Virtually all important Oval Office conversations were recorded on audio tape because President Nixon had ordered the installation of recorders.
Good evening. The country tonight is in the midst of what may be the most serious constitutional crisis in its history.
When a special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, pushed to get the tapes, Nixon wanted Cox fired. Both the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General refused to do it and quit in what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Under an order from the Supreme Court, the White House eventually turned over the tapes in July 1974. After a House committee voted to impeach and key Republicans told Nixon they'd lost faith in him, the 37th President of the United States resigned and bid a tearful goodbye to his staff.
Always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them.
Many of the president's top aides were convicted for their roles in the scandal. Nixon's successor, Gerald Ford, gave him a full pardon. It all started with a routine police radio call and 2 very surprised policemen.
The thing just kept growing, you know, in my mind. I'm thinking about every hour or so, my God, what are we involved with here?
All right, Pete Williams joins us now from Washington. Pete, it's so fascinating that still, all these years later, we want to learn more. I have to ask you, you spoke to those officers, and it seems like it was just good police work that they found these burglars. They did spot that arm, but it all started with that tape. They knew they were onto something big.
Yeah, the security guard was checking doors, found that there was tape on one lock, so he took it off. He went across the street to have lunch. He came back, and the tape was back. And he found the tape on 3 doors in the stairway. So he called his superiors and said, what do I do? And they said, you better call the police. So the call went out to these 2 officers to check out a suspicious circumstance. Those were the terms at the Watergate. So they had no idea what they were looking for when they got there. They didn't know it was a break-in. They didn't know where it was.
Pete, and it's so incredible because it led to the downfall of Richard Nixon. But 50 years later, we still have some very big questions unanswered. As you mentioned in the report, right, who ordered this and what exactly were they looking for?
Yeah, there are many theories about what they were looking for, that they were going to plant a bug, they wanted to photograph documents, that they were looking not so much for dirt on the Democrats, but for what the Democrats had on Nixon. They were looking, they had film, they had cameras, so why exactly were they there? And secondly, who ordered it? Was it John Mitchell, who was then the Attorney General, a close friend of the President's? Was it the President's Chief of Staff? Was it Nixon himself? Everybody's been pointing the finger at somebody else, but there's never been a definitive answer.
Pete Williams with that fascinating look back at Watergate. Pete, thank you. Coming up on Top Story, violence erupts in the Americas. Protesters clashing with police. Ecuador's president accused of corruption. The economy spiraling out of control. We'll have the latest on the turmoil. All right, back now with Top Story's Global Watch and the protests in India taking a deadly turn. One protester killed and several more injured in India's Telangana state. Demonstrators clashing with police and setting fire to train cars. You see it right there. Thousands of people taking to the streets for several days now, angry over the country's new short-term military recruitment system. And violent protests also erupting in the Americas as well. Economic turmoil in Ecuador causing protesters to clash with police. This is in Quito, the capital, throwing pieces of concrete at officers, authorities setting off tear gas canisters to disperse the crowd. Demonstrators angry with the president, Guillermo Lasso, over skyrocketing prices and accusing him of corruption. And a Chilean swimmer has broken not one, but 2 world records. Barbara Hernandez becoming the first person to ever swim 3 nautical miles. And a reminder here, nautical miles are longer than miles on the road. The 36-year-old completing the feat between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans off the coast of southern Chile in 44-degree water without a wetsuit. Hernandez also setting a Guinness World Record in February by swimming 1 nautical mile in 15 minutes and 3 seconds. As always, I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.